Chapter 2, Lesson 2, Compare and Order Fractions and Decimals. Our learning objective is you will compare and order fractions and decimals. The essential question is, how can you compare and order fractions and decimals? To compare fractions with the same denominators, compare the numerators. To compare fractions with the same numerators, compare the denominators. So if one or the other is the same, we don't really have to do any computing. We just solve from there. So it says same denominators. 2 of the 3 equal parts is greater than 1 of the 3 equal parts. So if we were to draw a diagram, that first rectangle up here shows that if it's 2/3, 2 of those thirds are shaded in, opposed to the 1/3, the 2 is greater than the 1, and judging by those pictures, 2/3 is greater than 1/3. So we know that 2/3 is greater than 1/3. If they're the same numerators, so they both have 2 something, 2/3 is that top rectangle, 2/5 is that bottom rectangle. So 2 of 3 equal parts is greater than 2 of 5 equal parts. So it's kind of the opposite of if they have the same denominators, because if the numerator's the same, then we're going to go with the smaller denominator, and that's going to be greater. So 2/3 is greater than 2/5. Let's look at unlock the problem. It says 3 new flowering dogwood trees were planted in a park in Springfield, Missouri. The trees were 6.5 feet, 5 2/3 feet, and 5 5/8 feet tall. Order the plant heights from least to greatest. So to compare and order fractions with unlike denominators, we need to write equivalent fractions with common denominators. Okay, in order to understand these lessons, make sure that you freshen up on what is a numerator, what is the denominator. Make sure that you know those like the back of your hand. Okay, so over here on the remember, it says equivalent fractions are fractions that name the same amount or part. Okay, so 1/2 and 5/10. If I draw a diagram or a diagram of 1/2 and then I draw a diagram of 5/10, they're going to be the same amount. Or if I tell you I ate 1/2 of a pizza or I ate 5 out of the 10 slices of the pizza, those are the same thing. The common denominator is a denominator that is the same in 2 or more fractions. Okay, so remembering those, let's look at this one way. So we're going to order 6 1/2, 5 2/3, and 5 5/8 from least to greatest. The first step is just to compare the whole numbers. So if I have a 6, a 5, and a 5, I know that 5 is less than 6. So I already know that this is my greatest number. So now we go on to step 2, because I still have 2 numbers here that I'm not sure if 2/3 or 5/8 is greater, because they don't have common denominators or numerators at the moment. So step 2 is if the whole numbers are the same, compare the fractions. Okay, so 5 2/3 and 5 5/8 both have 5 as the whole number. My computer froze. Sorry, let's try that again. Okay. Maybe. Okay, so if I already said that. All right. Sorry about that. I was having a technical difficulty. Let's try again. So I already said that 5 is less than 6, and then we're on step 2. So we're going to think, we're going to use common denominators to write equivalent fractions. So I'm going to think 24 is a multiple of 3 and 8. And I know that because 3 times 8 equals 24. So I automatically know that that's a multiple. So I can just use that. So 24 is a common denominator. So I'm going to take each of these 2 fractions here that I still have to figure out which one's greater, and I'm going to make them have a common denominator of 24. So in order to get there, I need to make each of the denominators 24. So if I have 2/3, I need to take those both times 8 so that I'm going to get something over 24. So 2 times 8 is 16. So 5 16/24 is equivalent to 5 2/3. Because if I did the same thing to the numerator and the denominator, then they are still equivalent. Okay, so now looking at 5 and 5/8, I need to take 8 times something to give me 24. Well, I've already told you up here, 8 times 3 is 24. So then I'm going to take 5 times 3 also. 5 times 3 is 15. So 5 and 15 24ths is less than 5 and 16 24ths. And that is less than 6 and 1/2. So now we compare the numerators and we're going to order the fractions from least to greatest. Now when I write my answers, I need to write the numbers that they gave me to order. Don't write your conversions. So I need to write the order from least to greatest is 5 and 5/8, 5 and 2/3, 6 and 1/2. Again, do not write 15 24ths and 16 24ths down here in this answer. It wants the original numbers they gave us. Apply. It says explain a simple method to compare 3 and 3/4 and 3 and 3/7. So to answer that math talk down here, the whole numbers are the same. So we would just compare the fractions. 3 of 4 equal parts is greater than 3 of 7 equal parts. So we would know that 3 and 3/4 is greater than 3 and 3/7. Okay, looking on our next page, fractions and decimals. You can compare fractions and decimals. So that's another way we're going to talk about. So one way we can compare fractions to decimals, earlier we just ordered different fractions. Now we're going to throw in decimals into that. So we're going to, one way that we can do it is to compare them both to 1/2. Because if one's less than 1/2 and one's greater than 1/2, then we don't have to worry about common denominators or getting the decimal to a fraction and then finding a common denominator from there. So if we just compare them both to 1/2, we have 92 hundredths and 2/7. So we're step 1 is going to compare 92 hundredths to 1/2. 92 hundredths is 92 over 100. I know that 1/2 is 50 over 100. 92 hundredths is definitely greater than 1/2. Compare 2/7 to 1/2. 2/7, I know that 3.5 sevenths equals 1/2. So 2/7 is less than that, so that is going to be less than 1/2. So if 92 hundredths is greater than 1/2 and 2/7 is less than 1/2, then I know that 92 hundredths is greater than 2/7. Okay, another way that we could do the same thing is to rewrite the fraction as a decimal. So we're going to compare 8/10 and 3/4. So we're going to write 3/4 as a decimal. Now remember, in order to write fractions as decimal, we're going to take that numerator divided by denominator. So our numerator is 3 up here, and our denominator is 4. So we're going to take 3 divided by 4. 4 does not go into 3 like we want, so we're going to add the decimal here and add a 0. 4 goes into 30 though, and that goes in 7 times, which is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. Bring down our 0 to hold our place value. 4 goes into 25 times, which is 20. So there's 0 remaining. Do not forget what I just forgot, to bring that decimal up. So it needs to be in a line here. Okay, so 3/4 equals 75 hundredths. Now we can compare 80 hundredths is greater than 75 hundredths. So 8/10 is greater than 3/4. We can also use a number line to order fractions and decimals. So example of that is that we're going to use a number line to order 95 hundredths, 3/10, 1/4, and 45 hundredths from least to greatest. Make sure you're paying attention to the directions because they flip those up on you sometimes. Sometimes they say least to greatest, sometimes they say greatest to least. So just always pay attention. So step 1 says to write each fraction as a decimal. So we're going to write 3/10 as a decimal. Again, we're going to take numerator divided by denominator. So 3 divided by 10, which we're going to say 10 does not go into 3 very well. Keep our decimal there. 10 goes into 30 3 times, which is 30. Bring down our 0, 0, no remainder. So it is 3/10 can be written as 30 hundredths. And 1/4, we're going to take numerator divided by denominator. 1 divided by 4, I'm going to say 0. Goes into 10 2 times, which is 8. Bring down our 2, which is remaining. Bring down our 0. Goes into 25 times. So 1/4 can be written as 25 hundredths. Now we're going to add all of these on the number line. So they already have 45 hundredths on for us and 95 hundredths. We need to add what we found up here. So 30 hundredths is going to be, if I just ignored that 0, it is between the 2 and the 4, and it's equally between. So right here is where I would put 30 hundredths. Now, I know that 25 hundredths would probably be between 30 hundredths and 20 hundredths, because this is the same thing as 20 hundredths, because it is ending in a 5, and this ends in a 0, and this ends in a 0. So that would be right here. So the order from least to greatest, over here on Math Idea, it says numbers read from left to right on a number line are in order from least to greatest. So this is least, this is greatest, so I'm going to go from least to greatest, so I'm going to go left to right. So the first number is 25 hundredths, but I'm not writing it at that. I'm going to look at what my original fraction was, which is 1/4. Then the next one on my number line is 30 hundredths, which was originally 3/10. Then I have 45 hundredths, which I can write as a decimal because that's what they said to order. And then I have 95 hundredths last. If you have any questions over this lesson, please be sure to ask your teacher. And just a reminder of what our lesson objective was, is that you will compare in order fractions and decimals.